On certain small planets, drenched with light and heat from a near or a great sun, evolution took a very different course from that with which we are familiar. The vegetable and animal functions were not separated into distinct organic types. Every organism was at once animal and vegetable. In such worlds, the higher organisms were something like gigantic and mobile herbs, but the violent flood of solar radiation rendered the tempo of their life much more rapid than that of our plants. To say that they looked like herbs is perhaps misleading, for they looked equally like animals. They had a definite number of limbs and a definite form of body, but all their skin was green, or streaked with green, and they bore here or there, according to their species, great masses of foliage. Owing to the slight power of gravitation on these small planets, the plant animals often supported vast superstructures on very slender trunks or limbs. In general, those that were mobile were less generously equipped with leaves than those that were more or less sedentary. In these small hot worlds, the turbulent circulation of water and atmosphere caused rapid changes in the condition of the ground from day to day. Storm and flood made it very desirable for the organisms of these worlds to be able to move from place to place. Consequently, the early plants, which owing to the wealth of solar radiation could easily store themselves with energy for a life of moderate muscular activity, developed powers of perception and locomotion. Vegetable eyes and ears, vegetable organs of taste, scent, and touch, appeared on their stems or foliage. For locomotion, some of them simply withdrew their primitive roots from the ground, and crept hither and thither with a kind of caterpillar action. Some spread their foliage, and drifted on the wind. From these, in the course of ages, arose true flyers. Meanwhile, the pedestrian species turned some of their roots into muscular legs, 4 or 6, or centipedal. The remaining roots were equipped with boring instruments, which on a new site could rapidly proliferate into the ground. Yet another method of combining locomotion and roots was perhaps more remarkable. The aerial portion of the organism would detach itself from its embedded roots, and wander off by land or air to strike root afresh in virgin soil. When the second site was exhausted, the creature would either go off in search of a third, and so on, or return to its original bed, which by now might have recovered fertility. There it would attach itself once more to its old dormant roots and wake them into new activity. Many species, of course, developed predatory habits and special organs of offense, such as muscular bows as strong as pythons for constriction, or talons, horns, and formidable serrated pincers. In these carnivorous creatures, the spread of foliage was greatly reduced, and all the leaves could be tucked snugly away along the back. In the most specialized beasts of prey, the foliage was atrophied, and had only decorative value. It was surprising to see how the environment imposed on these alien creatures formed suggestive of our tigers and wolves. And it was interesting, too, to note how excessive specialization and excessive adaptation to offense or defense ruined species after species, and how, when at length human intelligence appeared, it was achieved by an unimposing and inoffensive creature whose sole gifts were intelligence and sensibility toward the material world and toward its fellows. Before describing the efflorescence of humanity in this kind of world, I must mention one grave problem which faces the evolving life of all small planets, often at an early stage. This problem we had already come across on the other Earth. Owing to the weakness of gravitation and the disturbing heat of the sun, the molecules of the atmosphere very easily escape into space. Most small worlds, of course, lose all their air and water long before life can reach the human stage, sometimes even before it can establish itself at all. Others, less small, may be thoroughly equipped with atmosphere in their early phases, but at a much later date, owing to the slow but steady contraction of their orbits, they may become so heated that they can no longer hold down the furiously agitated molecules of their atmosphere. On some of these planets, a great population of living forms develops in early aeons, only to be parched and suffocated out of existence through the long-drawn inundation and desiccation of the planet. But in more favorable cases, life is able to adapt itself progressively to the increasingly severe conditions. In some worlds, for instance, a biological mechanism appeared by which the remaining atmosphere was imprisoned within a powerful electromagnetic field, generated by the world's living population. In others, the need of atmosphere was done away with altogether. Photosynthesis and the whole metabolism of life were carried on by means of liquids alone. The last dwindling gases were captured in solution, stored in huge tracts of spongy growths among the crowded roots, and covered with an impervious membrane. Both these natural biological methods occurred in one or other of the plant-animal worlds that reached the human level. I have space only to describe a single example, the most significant of these remarkable worlds. This was one in which all free atmosphere had been lost long before the appearance of intelligence. To enter this world and experience it through the alien senses and alien temperament of its natives was an adventure in some ways more bewildering than any of our earlier explorations. Owing to the complete absence of atmosphere, the sky, even in full sunlight, was black with the blackness of interstellar space, and the stars blazed. Owing to the weakness of gravitation and absence of molding action of air and water and frost on the planet's shrinking and wrinkled surface, the landscape was a mass of fold mountains, primeval and extinct volcanoes, congealed floods and humps of lava, and craters left by the impact of giant meteors. None of these features had ever been much smoothed by atmospheric and glacial influences. Further, the ever-changing stresses of the planet's crust had shattered many of the mountains into fantastic forms of icebergs. On our own Earth, where gravity, that tireless hound, pulls down its quarry with so much greater strength, these slender top-heavy crags and pinnacles could never have stood. Owing to the absence of atmosphere, the exposed surfaces of the rock were blindingly illuminated. The crevasses and all the shadows were black as night. Many of the valleys had been turned into reservoirs, seemingly of milk, for the surfaces of these lakes were covered with a deep layer of white glutinous substance to prevent loss by evaporation. Round about clustered the roots of the strange people of this world, like tree stumps where a forest had been felled and cleared. Each stump was sealed with the white glue. Each stretch of soil was in use, and we learned that, though some of this soil was the natural result of the past ages of action by air and water, most was artificial. It had been manufactured by great mining and pulverizing processes. In primitive times, and indeed throughout all pre-human evolution, the competitive struggle for a share of the rare soil of this world of rock had been one of the main spurs to intelligence. The mobile plantmen themselves were to be seen by day clustered in the valleys, their foliage spread to the sun. Only by night did we observe them in action, moving over the bare rock or busy with machines and other artificial objects, instruments of their civilization. There were no buildings, no roofed weatherproof enclosures, for there was no weather. But the plateaus and terraces of the rock were crowded with all manner of artifacts unintelligible to us. The typical plant man was an erect organism like ourselves. On his head he bore a vast crest of green plumes, which could either be folded together in the form of a huge, tight lettuce, or spread out to catch the light. 3 many-faceted eyes looked out from under the crest. Beneath these were 3 arm-like manipulatory limbs, green and serpentine, branching at their extremities. The slender trunk, pliable, encased in hard rings which slid into one another as the body bowed, was divided into 3 legs for locomotion. 2 of the 3 feet were also mouths, which could either sap from the root or devour foreign matter. The 3rd was an organ of excretion. The precious excrement was never wasted, but passed through a special junction between the 3rd foot and the root. The feet contained taste organs and also ears. Since there was no air, sound was not propagated above ground. By day, the life of these strange beings was mainly vegetable, by night, animal. Every morning after the long and frigid night, the whole population swarmed to its rooty dormitories. Each individual sought out his own root, fixed himself to it, and stood throughout the torrid day with leaves outspread. Till sunset he slept, not in a dreamless sleep, but in a sort of trance, the meditative and mystical quality of which was to prove in future ages a well of peace for many worlds. While he slept, the currents of sap hastened up and down his trunk, carrying chemicals between roots and leaves, flooding him with a concentrated supply of oxygen, removing the products of past catabolism. When the sun had disappeared once more behind the crags, displaying for a moment a wisp of fiery prominences, he would wake, fold up his leaves, close the passages to his roots, detach himself, and go about the business of civilized life. Night in this world was brighter than moonlight with us, for the stars were unobscured, and several great clusters hung in the night sky. Artificial light, however, was used for delicate operations. Its chief disadvantage was that it tended to send the worker to sleep. I must not even try to sketch the rich and alien social life of these beings. I will only say that here as elsewhere we found all the cultural themes known on Earth, but that in this world of mobile plants all was transposed into a strange key, a perplexing mode. Here as elsewhere we found a population of individuals deeply concerned with the task of keeping themselves and their society in being. Here we found self-regard, hate, love, the passions of the mob, intellectual curiosity, and so on. And here, as in all other worlds that we had thus far visited, we found the race in the throes of the great spiritual crisis which was the crisis familiar to us in our own worlds, and formed the channel by which we had telepathic access to other worlds. But here the crisis had assumed a style different from any that we had yet encountered. We had in fact begun to extend our powers of imaginative exploration. Leaving all else unnoticed, I must try to describe this crisis, for it is significant for the understanding of matters which reached far beyond this little world. We did not begin to have insight into the drama of this race till we had learned to appreciate the mental aspect of its dual animal-vegetable nature. Briefly, the mentality of the Plantmen in every age was an expression of the varying tension between the two sides of their nature, between the active, assertive, objectively inquisitive, and morally positive animal nature, and the passive, subjectively contemplative, and devoutly acquiescent vegetable nature. It was of course through animal prowess and practical human intelligence that the species had long ago come to dominate its world. But at all times this practical will had been tempered and enriched by a kind of experience which among men is very rare. Every day throughout the ages these beings had surrendered their feverish animal nature not merely to unconscious or dream-racked sleep, such as animals know, but to the special kind of awareness which, we learned, belongs to plants. Spreading their leaves, they had absorbed directly the essential elixir of life which animals receive only at second hand in the mangled flesh of their prey. Thus they seemingly maintained immediate physical contact with the source of all cosmical being. And this state, though physical, was also in some sense spiritual. It had far-reaching effect on all their conduct. If theological language were acceptable, it might well be called spiritual contact with God. During the busy night time they went about their affairs as insulated individuals, having no present immediate experience of their underlying unity, but normally they were always preserved from the worst excesses of individualism by memory of their daytime life. It took us long to understand that their peculiar daytime state did not consist simply in being united as a group mind, whether of tribe or race. Theirs was not the condition of the avian units in the bird cloud, nor yet of the telepathically constituted world minds which, as we were later to discover, had a very great part to play in galactic history. The Plantman did not, in his daytime life, come into possession of the precepts and thoughts of his fellow Plantmen, and thereby waken into a more comprehensive and discriminate awareness of the environment and of the multiple body of the race. On the contrary, he became completely unresponsive to all objective conditions, save the flood of sunlight drenching his spread leaves, and this experience afforded him an enduring ecstasy whose quality was almost sexual, an ecstasy in which subject and object seemed to become identical, an ecstasy of subjective union with the obscure source of all finite being. In this state, the Plantman could meditate upon his active nighttime life, and could become aware, far more clearly than by night, of the intricacies of his own motives. In this daytime mode he passed no moral judgments on himself or others. He mentally reviewed every kind of human conduct with detached contemplative joy as a factor in the universe. But when night came again, bringing the active nocturnal mood, the calm daytime insight into himself and others was lit with a fire of moral praise and censure. Now, throughout the career of this race, there had been a certain tension between the two basic impulses of its nature. All its finest cultural achievements had been made in times when both had been vigorous and neither predominant. But, as in so many other worlds, the development of natural science and the production of mechanical power from tropical sunlight caused grave mental confusion. The manufacture of innumerable aids to comfort and luxury, the spread of electric railways over the whole world, the development of radio communication, the study of astronomy and mechanistic biochemistry, the urgent demands of war and social revolution, all these influences strengthen the active mentality and weaken the contemplative. The climax came when it was found possible to do away with the daytime sleep altogether. The products of artificial photosynthesis could be rapidly injected into the living body every morning, so that the Plantman could spend practically the whole day in active work. Very soon the roots of the peoples were being dug up and used as raw material in manufacture. They were no longer needed for their natural purpose. I must not spend time in describing the hideous plight into which this world now fell. Seemingly artificial photosynthesis, though it could keep the body vigorous, failed to produce some essential vitamin of the spirit. A disease of robotism, of purely mechanical living, spread throughout the population. There was, of course, a fever of industrial activity. The Plantmen careened round their planet in all kinds of mechanically powered vehicles, decorated themselves with the latest synthetic products, tapped the central volcanic heat for power, expended great ingenuity in destroying one another, and in 1,000 other feverish pursuits pushed on in search of a bliss which ever eluded them. After untold distresses, they began to realize that their whole way of life was alien to their essential plant nature. Leaders and prophets dared to inveigh against mechanization and against the prevalent intellectualistic scientific culture and against artificial photosynthesis. By now, nearly all the roots of the race had been destroyed, but presently biological science was turned to the task of generating, from the few remaining specimens, new roots for all. Little by little, the whole population was able to return to natural photosynthesis. The industrial life of the world vanished like frost and sunlight. In returning to the old alternating life of animal and vegetable, the Plantmen, jaded and deranged by the long fever of industrialism, found in their calm daytime vegetable experience an overwhelming joy. The misery of their recent life intensified by contrast the ecstasy of the vegetal experience. The intellectual acuity that their brightest minds had acquired in scientific analysis, combined with the special quality of their revived plant life to give their whole experience a new lucidity. For a brief period they reached a plane of spiritual lucidity, which was to be an example and a treasure for future aeons of the galaxy. But even the most spiritual life has its temptations. The extravagant fever of industrialism and intellectualism had so subtly poisoned the Plantmen that when at last they rebelled against it, they swung too far, falling into the snare of a vegetal life as one-sided as the old animal life had been. Little by little, they gave less and less energy and time to animal pursuits, until at last their nights as well as their days were spent wholly as trees, and the act of exploring, manipulating animal intelligence died in them forever. For a while, the race lived on in an increasingly vague and confused ecstasy of passive union with the universal source of being. So well established and automatic was the age-old biological mechanism for preserving the planet's vital gases in solution that it continued long to function without attention. But industrialism had increased the world population beyond the limits within which the small supply of water and gases could easily fulfill its function. The circulation of material was dangerously rapid. In time the mechanism was overstrained. Leakages began to appear, and no one repaired them. Little by little, the precious water and other volatile substances escaped from the planet. Little by little, the reservoirs ran dry, the spongy roots were parched, the leaves withered. One by one, the blissful and no longer human inhabitants of that world passed from ecstasy to sickness, despondency, uncomprehending bewilderment, and on to death.